My family kicked me out of the house after my cousin falsely accused me, but when the truth came out years later, they came back, not to apologize, but to ask for money. Before continuing the story, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you won't miss more stories, and leave your like on the video. My name is Alex, and I need to tell you about the day my entire world fell apart when I was just 16 years old. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March, and I remember every detail like it happened yesterday. I was in the kitchen doing homework when my cousin came storming in, her face red with anger. She was 17, a year older than me, and had been living with us for 6 months after her parents went through a messy divorce. My parents had taken her in without question, treating her like the daughter they never had. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" She spat at me, slamming her backpack on the counter. "Always acting like you're better than everyone else." I looked up from my math homework, confused. "What are you talking about? I haven't even spoken to you today." Earlier that week, there had been tension in the house. My parents had been discussing college funds at dinner, mentioning how they'd been saving for my education since I was born. My cousin had made some comment about how unfair it was that some people got everything handed to them while others had to struggle. I'd foolishly suggested that maybe if she focused more on her grades instead of partying every weekend, she might qualify for scholarships too. "Don't play dumb with me," she continued, her voice getting louder. "I'm tired of your attitude, acting like you own this place. Look, I'm sorry if what I said about scholarships upset you. I was just trying to help," I said, genuinely attempting to diffuse whatever this was about. "But I really need to finish this assignment." That's when everything escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. She stepped closer, and I stood up from my chair, instinctively backing away because her aggressive energy was making me uncomfortable. My movement knocked over my water glass, sending it crashing to the floor. "Stay away from me!" she suddenly screamed at the top of her lungs, stumbling backward dramatically. "Don't you dare touch me!" "I didn't touch you. I was just trying to get away because you were—" "Help! Somebody help me!" she continued screaming, and I stood there in complete shock as she threw herself against the counter, making it look like I had pushed her. My parents came running from the living room, finding her on the floor with crocodile tears streaming down her face and me standing there with broken glass around my feet. Probably looking guilty as hell because I couldn't process what was happening fast enough to defend myself properly. "He grabbed me and pushed me," she sobbed to my parents. "I told him to leave me alone, but he wouldn't listen. I think he was going to hit me." "That's not what happened," I protested. But even to my own ears, my voice sounded weak and unconvincing compared to her theatrical performance. "I never touched her. She's lying." My father's face went dark in a way I'd never seen before. My mother immediately went to comfort my cousin, shooting me a look of disappointment and disgust that cut deeper than any physical blow could have. "We saw you standing over her," my mother said quietly, her voice full of betrayal. "The glass is broken. She's on the floor, and you're the only one who could have done this." "But I didn't do anything wrong," I kept insisting, my voice cracking with desperation. "She came in here angry, started yelling at me, and when I moved away from her, she started screaming and threw herself down." My cousin looked up at me with what I swear was the faintest smirk before burying her face in my mother's shoulder again. "I'm scared," she whispered just loud enough for everyone to hear. "What if he does it again when you're not here?" That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of what had happened, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. I kept thinking that surely by morning, cooler heads would prevail and my parents would realize how out of character this accusation was for me. I had never been violent with anyone in my life. I was the kid who rescued injured birds and couldn't even bring myself to kill spiders. The idea that I would physically assault my own cousin was so absurd that I genuinely believed the truth would come out within a day or two. But as I would soon learn, sometimes the truth isn't enough when people have already made up their minds about what they want to believe. The next morning, I woke up hoping that yesterday had been some kind of nightmare. But the cold atmosphere in the house told me otherwise. My parents called me into the living room after my cousin left for school, their faces set in stone. "Sit down," my father said, his voice carrying an authority I'd rarely heard before. "We need to talk about what happened yesterday." "Dad, I swear to you, I never laid a hand on her," I began, but he held up his hand to stop me. "Let me tell you what we know," my mother interrupted, pulling out a small notebook like she was presenting evidence in court. Yesterday afternoon, we heard screaming from the kitchen. When we got there, your cousin was on the floor, there was broken glass everywhere, and you were standing over her looking angry. I wasn't standing over her. I was just... We also found a bruise on her arm this morning, my father continued, ignoring my protests. A bruise that wasn't there the night before. My stomach dropped. What bruise? There's no way I gave her a bruise because I never touched her. She showed it to us, my mother said sadly. A finger-shaped mark on her upper arm, exactly where someone would grab if they were being aggressive. I felt like I was drowning. Mom, please, you've known me for 16 years. Have I ever been violent? Have I ever hurt anyone? This doesn't make any sense. People can change, my father said quietly. Teenagers go through phases, hormones, peer pressure. Maybe you've been feeling overlooked since she moved in. That's not true. I welcomed her here. I gave up my room so she could have the bigger one. And maybe you've been resenting that sacrifice, my mother added, making connections that weren't there. It would be natural to feel some jealousy. I realized they had already constructed an entire narrative in their minds. Every kind gesture I'd made toward my cousin was now being reinterpreted as evidence of hidden resentment. Every normal teenage mood swing was suddenly proof of my capacity for violence. What about her side of things? I asked desperately. Did you ask her why she was angry when she came into the kitchen? Did she tell you about our conversation earlier this week about college and scholarships? My parents exchanged glances. She mentioned that you've been making her feel unwelcome lately, making comments about her grades and her future. I was trying to encourage her. I suggested she could get scholarships if she worked harder. How is that making her feel unwelcome? Apparently, you said it in a condescending way that made her feel stupid and worthless, my mother replied. She said you've been doing things like that for weeks, and yesterday she finally stood up to you. So her version is that she confronted me about my attitude. And I physically assaulted her as punishment? That's exactly what happened, according to her, my father said firmly. And frankly, son, your aggressive tone right now isn't helping your case. I took a deep breath, trying to control my voice. I'm not being aggressive. I'm frustrated because you won't even consider that she might be lying. Why would she lie about something this serious? My mother asked. What would she have to gain? I didn't have a good answer for that yet. I didn't understand the psychology behind what my cousin was doing, or why she would risk destroying our family with such a lie. All I knew was that it wasn't true. I want to talk to her, I said. I want to confront her with you both there and ask her to tell the truth. Absolutely not, my father said immediately. She's scared of you now. We're not going to traumatize her further by forcing a confrontation. The decision is made, my mother said with finality. We've talked to your cousin extensively. We've examined the evidence. We know what we saw and heard yesterday. You grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise it. You pushed her, and when she was on the ground, you stood there showing no remorse. I showed no remorse because I hadn't done anything wrong. I was in shock. Your shock looked a lot like anger to us, my father replied coldly. That's when I realized that no amount of protesting was going to change their minds. They had already decided I was guilty, and every word I said in my defense was just further confirmation of my supposed guilt. I sat there in that living room, looking at the two people who were supposed to love and protect me more than anyone else in the world, and realized that they had already chosen my cousin over me. 3 days later, my parents announced their solution to the problem I had apparently created. I was sitting at the breakfast table, mechanically eating cereal while my cousin shot me occasional glances that I swear contained hints of satisfaction. We've made arrangements for you to live with your great-uncle for a while, my father said without preamble. Just until things settle down and we can figure out how to move forward as a family. I nearly choked on my cereal. Great-uncle? You mean Dad's uncle? The one who lives 3 hours away and has that huge property in the middle of nowhere? He's agreed to take you in, my mother said, not meeting my eyes. It'll be good for you to have some space, learn some responsibility, maybe gain some perspective on your actions. My great-uncle was notorious in our family for being difficult. He was in his 70s, had never married, and lived alone on a large property where he raised a few cattle and grew vegetables. Family gatherings always featured whispered conversations about how strange and cantankerous he'd become over the years. You're sending me away, I said, the reality hitting me like a physical blow. You're actually sending me away based on her word against mine. It's not permanent, my father said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Just until we can trust that this kind of incident won't happen again. What about school? What about my friends? What about college applications? I was supposed to be a senior next year, and we'd been planning my college strategy for months. You'll finish high school at the school near his place, my mother replied. And as for college, she paused, exchanging another one of those loaded glances with my father. We've decided that your college fund should go toward making things right with your cousin, my father continued. She's been through a traumatic experience and she'll need therapy to deal with what you did to her. Plus, her own college plans have been disrupted by her parents' divorce. The room started spinning. You're giving my college fund to her? It's the right thing to do, my mother said firmly. Actions have consequences, son. You can't expect to hurt someone and then benefit from the privileges that your father and I worked hard to provide. My cousin, who had been silent throughout this conversation, suddenly spoke up. I don't want to take his money, she said in a small voice that I recognized as her fake innocent tone. I mean, I appreciate you wanting to help me, but I don't want him to hate me even more. You're so thoughtful, sweetheart, my mother said, reaching over to pat her hand. But we insist. You deserve a chance at a good education, and this will help ensure that. When do I leave? I asked numbly. This weekend, my father replied. I've already spoken to your school about transferring your records, and your great-uncle is expecting you Sunday evening. The rest of that week passed in a blur of packing and disbelief. My friends at school noticed something was wrong, but I was too ashamed to tell them the truth. How do you explain that your own family believes you're capable of assault? On Friday, my best friend cornered me after basketball practice. Dude, what's going on? You've been weird all week, and now people are saying you're transferring schools? Family stuff, I mumbled. My parents think it's better if I live with my great-uncle for a while. That's random. Did you get in trouble or something? Something like that. Sunday came too quickly. My father loaded my belongings into the back of his truck. Just 2 suitcases and a box of personal items. Everything else I was leaving behind, including the life I'd built over 16 years. The drive to my great-uncle's place was mostly silent. My father made a few attempts at conversation, talking about how this could be a good opportunity for me to learn about hard work and self-reliance. I just stared out the window, watching my familiar world disappear behind me. My great-uncle's property was exactly as I remembered from childhood visits, isolated, run down, and unwelcoming. The house was a small 2-bedroom farmhouse that hadn't been updated since the 1970s. My great-uncle, a tall, weathered man with suspicious eyes, greeted us with minimal enthusiasm. So, you're the boy who's been causing problems, were his first words to me. Living with my great-uncle was like serving a prison sentence where I hadn't even been formally convicted of a crime. Every morning started at 5:30 with chores, feeding the cattle, collecting eggs from the chickens, and maintaining the vegetable garden that he sold produce from at the local farmer's market. Work builds character, he'd grunt whenever I looked tired or frustrated. Maybe if you'd learned that earlier, you wouldn't be here. My parents had clearly told him their version of events, and he'd accepted their judgment without question. In his mind, I was a troubled teenager who had committed assault and needed to be straightened out through hard labor and discipline. The new school was a small rural institution with maybe 300 students total. I was the outsider who transferred in during the final months of junior year, and news travels fast in small communities. Within a week, everyone seemed to know that I was the city kid living with the cranky old farmer because I'd gotten into trouble with my family. I kept my head down, focused on my studies, and tried to make it through each day without drawing attention to myself. My grades had always been good, and throwing myself into academics was the only thing that felt familiar in this completely alien environment. The isolation was the hardest part. I'd gone from having a solid group of friends and being involved in school activities to being completely alone. My phone, which used to buzz constantly with messages from friends, was now silent. My parents had made it clear that I needed to focus on rehabilitation rather than maintaining my old social connections. My cousin, meanwhile, was posting constantly on social media about her wonderful life with my parents. Photos of family dinners that should have included me, shopping trips funded by what used to be my college money, and updates about her improved grades now that she was in a supportive environment. Each post felt like a knife twist. You keep staring at that phone like it's going to change your situation, my great-uncle observed one evening as I scrolled through her latest updates. Maybe it's time you accepted that your old life is gone and figured out how to make something of this one. He wasn't entirely wrong. Wallowing in what I'd lost wasn't helping anyone, least of all me. I started putting the phone away and focusing on immediate survival rather than dwelling on the injustice of it all. The physical work was actually becoming less difficult as weeks turned into months. I was getting stronger, and there was something satisfying about accomplishing concrete tasks, fixing fences, hauling feed, repairing equipment. Unlike my situation with my family, where nothing I said or did seemed to matter, the work on the farm produced visible results. By the time senior year started, I had adapted to my new reality enough to function, though I still felt like I was living someone else's life. I'd grown 3 inches and gained 20 pounds of muscle from the farm work. My hands were calloused, my skin was tanned, and I looked completely different from the soft suburban kid who'd arrived months earlier. The other students at school started treating me with a kind of wary respect. I wasn't the troubled outsider anymore. I was the guy who could help move heavy equipment for the agriculture program and who never complained about hard work. A few kids even tried to befriend me, but I kept everyone at arm's length. Trust had become a foreign concept. My great-uncle's attitude toward me began to soften slightly as well, though he'd never admit it. He started asking for my opinion on farm decisions and occasionally grunted approval when I completed tasks without being asked. "You're not completely useless," he said one day after I'd spent the entire weekend helping him repair the barn roof. Coming from him, it was practically a declaration of love, but the nights were still the hardest. Lying in that small room, I'd think about what my life was supposed to look like. I should have been taking college prep classes, going to basketball games, maybe even dating. Instead, I was going to bed exhausted from physical labor, with no clear path to the future I'd always planned for. My parents called once a month, brief conversations that felt more like parole officer check-ins than family discussions. They'd ask how school was going, whether I was behaving myself, and if I was learning anything from the experience. "Your cousin is doing much better," my mother mentioned during one of these calls. "Her therapy is really helping, and she's planning to attend state university next fall. We're so proud of how she's overcome her trauma." By the time graduation approached, I realized that I had no desire to return to that life, even if they offered. 3 weeks after graduation, I made a decision that would change everything. I was 18 years old, legally an adult, and tired of waiting for other people to determine my fate. I found a job at Peterson's distribution center, a large warehouse operation about 40 minutes from my great-uncle's farm. "You're really going to work in a warehouse?" my great-uncle asked when I told him about the job. "What about college? What about it? I don't have money for college, remember? That's being spent on someone else's education." The job was physically demanding but straightforward, loading and unloading trucks, organizing inventory, operating forklifts. After a year of farm work, I was in better shape than most of the other new hires, and I quickly proved myself reliable. More importantly, the job introduced me to Jake and Marcus, 2 guys around my age who became the first real friends I'd made since being exiled. Jake was a stocky redhead with an infectious laugh who'd been working warehouses since dropping out of high school at 17. Marcus was tall and quiet, saving money to attend community college while helping support his younger siblings. "So, what's your story?" Jake asked during our first lunch break together. "You don't seem like the typical warehouse lifer." I gave them the abbreviated version. Family problems, needed to work instead of going to college right away, staying with my great-uncle temporarily. I still couldn't bring myself to tell the whole truth, but these guys didn't pry. "Family's overrated anyway," Jake said with a shrug. "Mine kicked me out when I turned 18, said I was an adult now and needed to figure things out on my own. At least they were honest about it," Marcus added. "Better than pretending they care while stabbing you in the back." Something about the way he said that made me look at him more closely. Speaking from experience, my dad split when I was 15. Promised he'd still be there for us kids, still help with money and stuff. 6 months later, he'd started a new family and acted like we didn't exist. Sometimes the people who hurt you worst are the ones who claim to love you. For the first time in over a year, I felt like I was talking to people who might actually understand what I'd been through. Not the specifics, maybe, but the broader experience of being abandoned by family when you needed them most. After a few months, the 3 of us were spending most of our free time together. We'd go out for beers after work, catch movies on weekends, and gradually I started feeling like I had a social life again. It wasn't the same as my old friendships, but it was real in a way that felt more solid. "You know what's crazy?" Jake said one Friday night as we sat around his apartment playing cards. "We all work the same crappy job, none of us have much money, but I'm having more fun than I did living with my parents. That's because we're not constantly being judged or told we're disappointing someone," Marcus replied. "There's something to be said for low expectations." I'd been thinking the same thing. Despite working a physically demanding job and living in a small room at my great-uncle's place, I was starting to feel more relaxed than I had in years. Nobody here was analyzing my every word for signs of violent tendencies. By the end of my first year at the warehouse, I'd saved enough money to move out on my own. Jake, Marcus, and I found a 3-bedroom apartment in town and split the rent 3 ways. It wasn't fancy. Second-hand furniture, mismatched dishes, and a television that only worked if you hit it just right. But it was ours. To independence, Marcus said, raising his beer bottle in a toast on our first night in the apartment. To making our own families, Jake added. To proving that being thrown away doesn't mean you're worthless, I contributed. My great-uncle actually seemed almost sorry to see me go, though he'd never say it directly. You turned out better than I expected when you first showed up here, he admitted, as I loaded my belongings into Jake's pickup truck. Thanks for taking me in, I said, and I genuinely meant it. Living with him had been difficult, but it had also taught me that I was capable of surviving much more than I'd ever imagined. That night, sitting in our new living room with my 2 best friends, I realized that I'd accidentally built something that felt more like family than the family that had rejected me. For the first time since that terrible day in the kitchen when my cousin destroyed my life with her lies, I felt like I might actually have a future worth looking forward to. The business idea came from Jake's frustration with his landlord, of all things. Our apartment complex was managed by a guy who cut every possible corner, including using the cheapest cleaning supplies for common areas. The hallways always smelled like chemical death, and the clean floors were sticky to walk on. I could make better cleaning products in my kitchen, Jake grumbled after we'd complained to the manager about the horrible smell in the lobby. My grandmother used to make all her own cleaners, and they actually worked. So why don't you? Marcus challenged. Seriously, how hard could it be? That weekend, Jake actually tried it. He mixed up a batch of all-purpose cleaner using his grandmother's recipe. Vinegar, baking soda, essential oils, and a few other ingredients that cost maybe $3 total. The stuff not only cleaned better than the industrial garbage our landlord used, it actually left the apartment smelling fresh instead of toxic. Dude, this is actually amazing, I said after we'd used it to clean our entire kitchen. It got stains out of the counter that I thought were permanent. Right? And look at this. Jake showed us the ingredient list for the commercial cleaner we'd been buying. Half of this stuff I can't even pronounce, and it costs $12 a bottle. Marcus, who was always the practical one among us, started doing calculations on the back of an envelope. If you can make this for $3 and it works better than the $12 stuff, what could you sell it for? Maybe $7 or $8? Still cheaper than the commercial stuff, but with a decent profit margin. We spent the rest of the evening figuring out the economics. Jake's grandmother's recipe could be scaled up pretty easily, and the ingredients were available in bulk at warehouse stores. For about $50 in materials, he could make around 20 bottles of cleaner that we could potentially sell for $8 each. That's $160 in revenue from $50 in costs, Marcus calculated. If we could sell even half of what we make, we'd be doubling our money. Who would buy it, though? I asked. Random people aren't going to trust homemade cleaning products from 3 guys they've never heard of. Start small, Jake suggested. What if we offered to clean people's houses and used our own products? If the cleaning works well, they'd be interested in buying the supplies. It was a simple idea, but it made sense. We could test both our product and the market at the same time. Within a month, we'd turned Jake's grandmother's recipes into a small line of cleaning products. All-purpose cleaner, glass cleaner, and wood polish. Our first customers were our co-workers at the warehouse. We offered to clean their apartments for $25, using our homemade products with a money-back guarantee if they weren't satisfied. Word spread quickly when people realized we actually did better work than the professional cleaning services that charged 3 times as much. You guys should quit the warehouse and do this full-time, one of our customers suggested after we'd cleaned her place so thoroughly that it looked like a different apartment. We're not ready for that yet, Marcus replied, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. Within 6 months, we had a waiting list of customers and were spending most of our weekends cleaning houses and apartments. The demand for our products grew alongside the cleaning service. People wanted to buy the same supplies we used because they could see how effective they were. Jake quit his warehouse job first, when our weekend earnings consistently exceeded his full-time wages. Marcus and I followed within a few months as the business continued to grow. We registered as a proper LLC, got business insurance, and started advertising beyond just word of mouth. Clean Solutions, we'd named our company, with the tagline, effective, natural, affordable. It wasn't flashy, but it accurately described what we offered. By the end of our second year, we had 12 employees and were servicing over 300 regular customers. Jake handled product development and manufacturing, Marcus managed the books and logistics, and I focused on customer service and business development. "Remember when our biggest worry was splitting rent 3 ways?" Jake said one afternoon as we watched our team loading supplies into company vans. The success felt surreal sometimes. 3 guys who'd been written off by their families had built something real and profitable through hard work and stubbornness. 10 years had passed since that devastating day in my parents' kitchen, and I barely recognized the person I'd become. What started as 3 guys with homemade cleaning products had evolved into a legitimate business empire that none of us had dared to imagine when we were splitting rent and eating ramen noodles. Clean Solutions now operated out of a 15,000 square foot facility that we owned outright. We employed 47 people across 3 divisions: residential cleaning, commercial contracts, and product manufacturing. Our natural cleaning products were being sold in 12 states through a network of independent retailers. "The Henderson Mall contract came through," Marcus announced during our Monday morning meeting, sliding the signed agreement across my desk. 18-month deal, renewable for 3 years. That's another $42,000 in monthly revenue. Jake whistled low. "Remember when 42,000 was what we hoped to make in an entire year?" I studied the contract, still sometimes amazed by how far we'd come. The Henderson Mall was the largest shopping center in the region, and landing their cleaning contract meant competing against established companies that had been in business for decades. "What's our total monthly revenue now?" I asked Marcus, though I already knew the answer. "Just over 320,000. Net profit is averaging around 90,000 monthly after all expenses and employee benefits." We'd learned early that treating employees well was not just the right thing to do, but also good business. Our crew leaders earned 15% above market rate, we provided health insurance, and we had a profit-sharing program that kept turnover low. Beyond the business, each of us had built substantial personal wealth. I owned a comfortable 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood, drove a reliable car that I'd bought with cash, and had investment accounts that would have seemed impossible during my warehouse days. More importantly, I had the security that comes from being financially independent. "The Portland expansion is on track too," Jake reported. "We should be ready to launch there by fall. I've been talking to suppliers about scaling up production to meet the increased demand. Portland would be our first expansion into a major metropolitan market, a significant test of whether our model could work beyond the smaller cities where we'd built our reputation. If it succeeded, we had plans for Seattle, Denver, and eventually California." "Any word from that investor group?" Marcus asked. "We'd been approached by a private equity firm interested in buying a stake in the company to fund faster expansion. They're offering $1.8 million for 30%, I replied, which values us at $6 million total." $6 million, Jake repeated slowly. "Remember when we thought having 6,000 in the bank made us rich?" The irony wasn't lost on any of us. We'd built more wealth in 10 years than many people accumulate over entire careers, and we'd done it starting from nothing, with no family support, no college degrees, and no business connections. Just stubbornness, hard work, and the kind of desperate determination that comes from having no other options. My personal net worth was now approaching $800,000, between my share of the business equity, real estate, and investments. It was more money than my parents had ever talked about having, certainly more than the college fund that had been taken away from me and given to my cousin. Sometimes I wondered what my life would have looked like if none of that had happened. Would I have gone to college, gotten some conventional job, and ended up in middle management somewhere? Would I have ever learned that I was capable of building something from scratch? "You know what's crazy?" I said to Jake and Marcus as we wrapped up the meeting. "I actually feel grateful sometimes. Not for what happened, but for how it forced me to become someone I never would have been otherwise." "The universe has a twisted sense of humor," Marcus agreed. "Take away someone's safety net and sometimes they learn to fly." That afternoon, I drove out to visit my great-uncle, something I'd been doing monthly since moving back to town. He was 81 now, moving slower but still maintaining his property with the help of a part-time worker I'd hired for him. "Business is good?" he asked, as he always did. "Business is very good. We just signed our biggest contract yet." He nodded approvingly. "Your parents know how well you're doing?" "They know I'm doing fine. That's enough for now." I had no idea that within a few months, the family that had cast me out would suddenly decide they wanted back into my life. The call came on a Tuesday morning in November, interrupting our weekly management meeting. I almost didn't answer when I saw Dad on my phone screen. We hadn't spoken in over 2 years, and our previous conversations had been brief and uncomfortable. "Alex?" My father's voice sounded older, more uncertain than I remembered. "Do you have a few minutes to talk? I'm in a meeting right now. Can I call you back?" This is important. Son, family business." Something in his tone made me excuse myself from the conference room. Jake and Marcus gave me questioning looks, but I waved them off and stepped into my office. "What's going on, Dad?" "We need to talk to you. In person. There are some things we need to tell you about what happened years ago." My stomach tightened. After a decade of silence about the accusations that had destroyed my teenage life, they suddenly wanted to talk. "What kind of things?" "Not over the phone. Can you come home this weekend? Your mother and I would like to take you to dinner, somewhere we can talk privately." "I don't know if that's a good idea. We haven't exactly—" "Please, Alex, it's about your cousin. There are things you need to know." My cousin, the person whose lies had cost me my family, my college fund, and my entire planned future. I hadn't thought about her in months, had successfully built a life where her betrayal was just ancient history. "What about her?" "Not over the phone," he repeated. "But Alex, we were wrong. About everything. We need to make this right." After I hung up, I sat in my office for 20 minutes trying to process what I'd just heard. We were wrong about everything. Did that mean they finally knew the truth? Had my cousin finally confessed to her lies? Jake knocked on my office door. "Everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "My parents want to meet with me this weekend. They say they have something important to tell me about what happened when I was 16. "The thing that got you sent away?" I'd told Jake and Marcus the real story years ago, during one of those late-night conversations where alcohol and friendship had lowered all the usual barriers. They'd been appropriately outraged on my behalf. Apparently they know they were wrong about everything, which suggests my cousin finally told them the truth. After 10 years? Why now? That was the question that bothered me most. If my cousin had been carrying the guilt of her lie all this time, what had finally motivated her to confess? The drive to my hometown that Saturday felt surreal. I was returning as a successful business owner driving a car that cost more than my father made in 3 months. But I still felt like that confused, hurt teenager who'd been cast out of his own family. My parents had chosen a restaurant I'd never heard of, an upscale place that definitely hadn't existed when I was growing up here. They were already seated when I arrived, looking older and somehow smaller than I remembered. "Alex," my mother said, rising to hug me. I accepted the embrace stiffly, not sure how to navigate this interaction with people who had spent 10 years treating me like a dangerous stranger. "You look good," my father said, shaking my hand and taking in my appearance. "Successful." "I'm doing well," I replied carefully, sitting across from them at the table. "You said there was something important you needed to tell me." They exchanged one of those loaded glances I remembered from my childhood, the kind that meant they'd already discussed how to handle this conversation. "Your cousin confessed," my mother said without preamble. "Last month, she told us that she lied about what happened that day in the kitchen." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting them. After 10 years of being treated like a criminal for something I hadn't done, hearing the truth acknowledged felt both validating and devastating. "She said she made it up?" I asked, my voice calmer than I felt. "All of it," my father confirmed. "The bruise, the story about you grabbing her, everything. She said she was angry about the college fund conversation and wanted to get back at you for making her feel stupid. She destroyed my entire life because she was embarrassed about her grades?" "She was 17 and immature," my mother said defensively, then caught herself. "Not that it excuses what she did. We should have investigated more thoroughly instead of just believing her. You should have known me well enough to know I'd never hurt anyone," I said quietly. 16 years of raising me should have counted for something. The silence stretched uncomfortably. They couldn't argue with that, and we all knew it. "We want to make things right," my father finally said. "We know we can't undo the damage, but we want to try to repair our relationship. What does making things right look like to you?" Another loaded glance between them. "Well, we know you missed out on college because of what happened. We'd like to help you get your education now, if that's something you're interested in. And we know you've been struggling financially," my mother added, "living on your own so young, without family support. We want to help you get back on your feet." I stared at them, trying to process what I was hearing. They thought I was struggling? They wanted to help me get back on my feet? What makes you think I'm struggling financially? Well, you've been working warehouse jobs, haven't you? And we know how hard it must be without a college degree. They had no idea. In their minds, I was still the cast-out teenager who'd been sent away to learn responsibility through manual labor. Actually, I own a business now, I said. A successful one. I employ 47 people and we're expanding into new markets. The surprise on their faces was almost comical. As I explained clean solutions, watching their expressions shift from surprise to confusion to something that looked like pride, I realized something unsettling. They weren't just here to apologize. They were here because they needed something from me. "That's wonderful, Alex," my mother said when I finished. "We're so proud of what you've accomplished." Proud? The word came out sharper than I'd intended. "You're proud of what I accomplished after you kicked me out and gave my college fund to the person who lied about me?" "We know we made mistakes," my father said. "Terrible mistakes. But we're family, and family should stick together." Where was that philosophy 10 years ago? Another uncomfortable silence, and then my mother spoke quietly. "There's something else we need to tell you. Your cousin. She's sick. She has cancer." And there it was, the real reason for this sudden reconciliation. The silence that followed my mother's revelation felt heavy with expectation. They were waiting for me to respond with concern, sympathy, or offers of help. Instead, I found myself studying their faces, looking for signs of genuine remorse versus calculated manipulation. "I'm sorry to hear she's sick," I said carefully. "That must be difficult for all of you. The treatment is very expensive," my father continued. "Her insurance doesn't cover everything, and the experimental therapies that might help, well, they're not cheap." "How expensive are we talking about?" "The initial treatment plan is around $200,000, my mother said. "And if she needs the experimental therapy, it could be another $300,000 beyond that. $500,000. I did the math quickly. It was more than half of my current net worth, but not an amount that would destroy my financial security. If they'd approached me 5 years ago, it would have been impossible." "She feels terrible about what she did to you," my mother continued. "The guilt has been eating at her for years. When she got the diagnosis, she said it felt like karma for destroying your life with her lies." "So she confessed because she thought she was dying?" "She confessed because she wanted to make things right before it was too late," my father corrected. "She knows she can never undo the damage, but she wanted us to know the truth." I took a sip of my water, buying time to think. After 10 years of silence, my cousin was suddenly motivated by guilt and mortality to tell the truth. My parents, who hadn't bothered to check on my welfare in years, were now sitting across from me making carefully worded statements about family loyalty. "Where is she now?" "She's staying with us," my mother said. "She moved back home when the treatment started. She's too weak to live alone." Of course she was staying with them. The same house I'd been exiled from was now providing sanctuary for the person whose lies had caused my exile. "She'd like to see you," my father said, "to apologize in person. She knows it won't change anything, but she wants to try to make amends, and you want me to help pay for her treatment." They exchanged another one of those glances. "We're not asking you to pay for everything," my mother said quickly. "Just whatever you can afford. We know you've built a successful business and—" "You know I've built a successful business because I told you 20 minutes ago," I interrupted. "Before that, you thought I was struggling and needed your help getting back on my feet." "That's not entirely fair," my father protested. "We always knew you were smart and capable. We just didn't realize how well you'd done for yourself. Because you never bothered to find out. In 10 years, neither of you ever called just to see how I was doing. We thought you needed space," my mother said defensively. "We thought pushing for contact would just make things worse." "Space? You gave me 11 years of space. But the moment you need something from me, suddenly family loyalty matters." The server approached our table, probably wondering why none of us had touched our menus yet. We ordered quickly, none of us really caring about food, and waited for him to leave before continuing this increasingly tense conversation. "Look," my father said, leaning forward. "We know we screwed up. We know we failed you as parents, but she's dying, Alex. Whatever she did to you, whatever we did to you, she doesn't deserve to die because we can't afford to save her. And I didn't deserve to lose my family because you couldn't be bothered to investigate her accusations," I replied. "But that didn't stop you from throwing me away when it was convenient." "We're not asking you to forgive us," my mother said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "We're asking you to be the better person we should have raised you to be." The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. They were trying to use my own moral code against me, suggesting that refusing to help would make me as bad as they had been. "You want to know what's really incredible about this conversation?" I said, setting down my water glass harder than necessary. "You've spent the last hour talking about making things right and family loyalty, but not once have either of you actually apologized for what you did to me." They looked genuinely surprised by this observation. "You've acknowledged that you were wrong. You've expressed regret about the consequences, and you've talked about wanting to repair our relationship. But neither of you has said, 'I'm sorry for not believing you,' or 'I'm sorry for abandoning you when you needed us most.'" "We are sorry," my father said quickly. "Of course we're sorry. No, you're sorry that the situation is inconvenient now. You're sorry that you need something from someone you thought was beneath your concern." The food arrived, providing a welcome interruption. We ate in relative silence, each lost in our own thoughts about family, loyalty, and the price of forgiveness. Finally, my mother spoke. "What would it take for you to help her?" I looked at these two people who had raised me for 16 years and then discarded me based on a lie, and I realized that I felt nothing for them. Not anger, not love, not even disappointment. They were strangers who happened to share my genetic code. "Nothing," I said simply. "There's nothing you could say or do that would make me want to help her. She destroyed my life for sport, and you helped her do it. The answer is no." I stood up, left enough cash on the table to cover my portion of the meal, and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. 2 weeks after the disastrous dinner with my parents, I found a long email waiting in my inbox from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Please read this, from your cousin." My first instinct was to delete it immediately, but curiosity got the better of me. The email was a masterpiece of manipulation disguised as heartfelt confession. She started by acknowledging what she'd done to me, describing in detail how she'd fabricated the bruise using makeup techniques she'd learned from online tutorials. She explained how she'd planned the whole confrontation, knowing that our parents would be within earshot when she started screaming. "I was 17 and stupid and angry about so many things that had nothing to do with you," she wrote. "My parents were divorcing. I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. And when you suggested I could get scholarships if I worked harder, it felt like you were calling me worthless. I wanted to hurt you the way I was hurting, so I decided to make you pay for making me feel small." The confession continued for several paragraphs, detailing how the lie had spiraled beyond what she'd intended. She claimed she'd expected our parents to ground me or take away privileges, not exile me completely. When they'd decided to send me away and give her my college fund, she'd been too scared to admit the truth. "I watched you get punished for something I made up, and I was too much of a coward to stop it. Every year that passed made it harder to tell the truth because the consequences kept getting bigger. How do you admit to destroying someone's life over hurt feelings?" She went on to describe how the guilt had affected her over the years. Failed relationships, difficulty trusting people, a constant feeling that she didn't deserve happiness because of what she'd done to me. She painted herself as a victim of her own lie, someone who'd been suffering in silence while I'd been building my successful life. "I know you probably think I lived happily ever after with your college money, but that's not what happened. I dropped out of college after 2 years because I couldn't handle the guilt every time I wrote a tuition check. I've been working dead-end jobs ever since, never able to commit to anything because I knew I didn't deserve success built on lies." The middle section of the email focused on her cancer diagnosis and treatment. She described the fear, the pain, the uncertainty about whether she'd survive. But then she pivoted to talking about how the diagnosis had given her clarity about what was really important. "Facing death made me realize that I couldn't die with this lie on my conscience. I had to tell our parents the truth, even though I knew it would destroy any remaining relationship I had with them. They're disappointed in me in a way that goes beyond words, but they still love me because that's what family does. That's what family does." The phrase was clearly calculated to make me feel guilty for not extending the same unconditional love and support. She went on to describe her current situation in detail, designed to evoke maximum sympathy. The exhaustion from chemotherapy, the financial stress of medical bills, the fear of leaving her young daughter without a mother. She mentioned her daughter several times, a detail I found particularly manipulative since I'd had no idea she even had a child. "Emma is only 4 years old, and she doesn't understand why mommy is sick all the time. I look at her and think about how you were just a kid too when I hurt you. And I wonder what kind of person destroys a child's life out of spite. But then I think about what kind of person lets a child grow up without her mother when he has the power to help." The emotional manipulation was so heavy-handed it was almost insulting. She was positioning my refusal to help as equivalent to orphaning a 4-year-old child, as if I was personally responsible for her medical bills because I had the financial means to pay them. The final section was a direct appeal for money, couched in language about redemption and family healing. She claimed that accepting my help would be a form of punishment for her, a way of acknowledging the debt she owed me for destroying my life. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know that's probably impossible after what I did. I'm asking you to be the person I should have been 11 years ago. Be the person who does the right thing even when it's hard, even when the other person doesn't deserve it. She ended with specific details about her treatment plan and costs, along with information about how to wire money directly to the hospital. After reading the email twice, I realized what bothered me most about it. She spent thousands of words describing her guilt, her suffering, her fear, and her daughter's needs, but she never once acknowledged the specific damage she'd done to my life. I deleted the email without responding and blocked her address. If she wanted to die with guilt on her conscience, that was her choice to make. The decision to go public with my story wasn't made in anger or spite, though I'm sure that's how my family saw it. It came from a conversation with Marcus about the psychology of enablement and how silence protects abusers while isolating their victims. You know what's crazy? Marcus said during one of our evening walks around the neighborhood. Your family spent 11 years treating you like the problem, and now they want you to solve their problem. They've never had to face any real consequences for what they did. What kind of consequences could they face? It's not like there are legal penalties for believing lies about your own kid. Social consequences? Right now, everyone in your hometown probably thinks of you as the troubled kid who got sent away. Meanwhile, your parents get to play the role of long-suffering family members dealing with a difficult situation. He was right. My exile had been framed as a necessary intervention, not as a family's failure to protect their child from false accusations. What if people knew the truth? Marcus continued. What if they knew that your cousin lied, your parents believed her without investigation, and now they want your money to fix the mess they created? That night, I sat down and wrote out the entire story. Not an angry rant or a call for sympathy, but a clear, factual account of what had happened and how it had affected my life. I included specific details, dates, quotes, the amount of my college fund that had been given to my cousin. I posted it on social media with a simple introduction. This is the story I've never told publicly about why I left home at 18 and didn't speak to my family for over a decade. I'm sharing it now because I think it's important for people to understand how false accusations can destroy lives and how families can fail the children they're supposed to protect. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the post had been shared dozens of times by people I'd lost touch with years ago. Former classmates, teachers, and family friends began commenting with messages of support and shock. I always knew something didn't add up, wrote my old basketball coach. You were one of the gentlest kids I ever coached. The idea that you'd hurt anyone never made sense to me. Your parents told everyone you'd gotten into trouble and needed to learn responsibility, commented a family friend. They made it sound like you'd been arrested or something. I had no idea they'd kicked you out over an accusation. Several people shared their own stories of false accusations and family betrayal. The comment thread became a support group for people who'd experienced similar situations, and I realized how many others had been carrying shame that didn't belong to them. Within a week, the post had been shared over 1,000 times and had generated hundreds of comments. Local news outlets in my hometown picked up the story, framing it as an example of how social media was being used to challenge traditional narratives about family conflict. My parents' reaction was swift and predictable. My father called 3 days after the post went viral, his voice shaking with anger and embarrassment. How could you do this to us? He demanded. Everyone in town is talking about this. Your mother can't even go to the grocery store without people staring at her. I told the truth about what happened. If that's embarrassing for you, maybe you should think about why. You've destroyed our reputation over something that happened 11 years ago. We made mistakes, but airing our family business on the internet is just vindictive. Your reputation was built on a lie. I'm just correcting the record. Take it down, he ordered. Take it down right now, or we'll have our lawyer contact you about defamation. Everything I wrote is true, and you know it. Your lawyer can't do anything about the truth. You're destroying any chance we have of reconciling as a family. We don't have a chance of reconciling, I replied calmly. We haven't been a family since the day you chose to believe her lie over 16 years of knowing my character. This doesn't change that, It just makes sure everyone else knows it too. My cousin tried a different approach, sending messages through mutual acquaintances, asking me to remove the post for the sake of her daughter. She claimed that having her mother's lies exposed publicly would traumatize the child and make her a target for bullying. I felt a flicker of sympathy for the innocent 4-year-old caught in the middle of this mess, but I also recognized the manipulation tactic. My cousin was using her child as a human shield, trying to make me responsible for protecting her from the consequences of her own actions. The post stayed up. My family's attempts to pressure me into silence had failed, just like their attempts to get money from me had failed. For the first time in 11 years, I was controlling the narrative about what had happened to me, and they couldn't do anything to stop it. The best part was that I didn't feel angry anymore. Telling the truth had been liberating in a way I hadn't expected. 6 months after I'd shared my story publicly, I was reviewing quarterly reports in my office when Jake knocked on my door with an unusual expression on his face. "There's something you need to see," he said, holding up his phone. "It's about your cousin." The obituary was brief and formal. She had died 3 weeks earlier after her cancer treatment had failed. The service had been private, attended only by immediate family. There was no mention of the controversy that had surrounded her final months, just the standard language about a beloved daughter and mother who would be deeply missed. I stared at the screen for a long moment, trying to identify what I was feeling. It wasn't satisfaction. I had never wanted her to die, despite everything she'd done. It wasn't sadness either, at least not for her. If anything, I felt a strange sense of completion, like a book I'd been forced to read had finally reached its inevitable conclusion. "You okay?" Jake asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I think so. It's weird. Part of me thought this day would feel more significant somehow. Sometimes closure isn't as dramatic as we expect it to be." That evening, I drove out to visit my great-uncle, something I still did regularly even though he was now 83 and needed more help than he'd ever admit. I found him in his vegetable garden, stubbornly pulling weeds despite the arthritis that made every movement painful. "Heard about your cousin," he said without preamble, the way he always cut straight to important matters. "How are you handling it?" "Better than I expected. I keep waiting to feel guilty about not helping her, but I don't." "Good. Guilt's a waste of time when you've got nothing to be guilty about. Her daughter is an orphan now. 4 years old, no father in the picture, and now no mother either. That's sad for the child, but it's not your fault, and it's not your responsibility to fix." We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the simple task of maintaining his garden, providing a welcome break from thinking about death and family drama. "You know what's interesting?" I said as we loaded tools into his shed. "I spent so many years angry about what she took from me, but I'm not sure I would change anything if I could go back. How do you figure? If she hadn't lied about me, I probably would have gone to college, gotten some conventional job, and lived a completely ordinary life. I never would have learned that I could build something from nothing, never would have met Jake and Marcus, never would have discovered what I was actually capable of when everything was stripped away." 2 weeks later, I received a call from a lawyer representing my cousin's estate. Her daughter had been placed with distant relatives who were struggling financially, and they were wondering whether I might be willing to contribute to a trust fund for the child's education and care. "I understand there was some family conflict," the lawyer said carefully, "but this is about an innocent child who has lost everything. I appreciate you reaching out," I replied, "but I'm not interested in being involved in any way. The child has legal guardians who are responsible for her welfare. If they need financial assistance, there are social services and charitable organizations that can help." It sounded harsh, but it was honest. I felt sympathy for a child who'd lost her mother, but I wasn't going to let that sympathy trap me into ongoing financial obligations to people who'd rejected me when I was a child myself. A year later, Clean Solutions had expanded into 5 states and was generating annual revenue of over $4 million. Jake, Marcus, and I had each achieved a level of financial security that would have seemed impossible during our warehouse days. My parents made one final attempt at reconciliation about 2 years after my cousin's death. My mother sent a handwritten letter, not asking for money this time, but requesting a chance to rebuild our relationship now that the source of our conflict was gone. "I know we failed you when you needed us most," she wrote. "I know we can't undo the damage we caused or get back the years we lost. But you're our only child, and we're getting older, and we don't want to die estranged from the son we love." The letter was probably sincere, and part of me felt sad for 2 aging people who were realizing too late what their choices had cost them. but sincerity wasn't enough to bridge an 11-year gap built on betrayal and abandonment. I sent a brief response thanking them for the letter, but explaining that I'd built a life that didn't include them, and I wasn't interested in changing that. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. Today, 15 years after being falsely accused and cast out of my family, I can honestly say that being abandoned was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because I enjoyed the pain, but because surviving it taught me who I really was when everything else was stripped away. Jake and Marcus are my brothers in every way that matters. The employees who've built Clean Solutions with us are extended family. My great uncle, who took in a stranger's troubled kid and helped him become a man, showed me more love than the people who'd raised me for 16 years. My cousin's lie didn't destroy my life. It revealed that the life I thought I had was built on conditions that could be revoked at any moment. The life I built afterward was founded on my own choices, my own work and relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. She died believing she'd ruined me, never knowing that her betrayal had actually set me free. That's the kind of justice I can live with.